Hi everyone, it's Maria from Jadot Le Papier. I want to do a voiceover for this antique book flip through. It's actually, there's not a lot of confirmed information, just some research that I've done on the internet. The Bobsie Twins was actually started by the Stratemeyer Syndicate. It was believed that Edward Stratemeyer actually wrote the first volume. This particular book, I don't have the copyright or the original leading pages anymore, and only a few of the chapters survived. So I just have maybe a little bit of cobbled information. But this one doesn't have a theme. And the chapters that I do have are more like episodes or adventures in their childhood. If you don't know the story, the Bobbsey family is actually an upper middle class family. They have 2 sets of fraternal twins, the oldest being Nan and Bert, and the youngest Flossie and Freddie. And they're about 6 years apart in age. And the series actually went on for over 74 years, 1904 to 1979, with over 72 volumes. I wanted to make this an altered book and save as many of those chapters as I could because of the history and because of the unique nature of probably this early or earliest volume available. I wasn't able to repaint it because before I placed the lacquer or painted the lacquer on there, the details just wouldn't show, and I didn't have the skill set to be able to repaint or touch up the paint. I wanted to put this keepsake together from the child's perspective, from Nan's point of view as the oldest girl, saving stories from their childhood, special ephemera, and little bits and bobs. And of course, there has to be a chapter about recipes and learning how to bake and cook. I love including vintage recipes or antique recipes in this case. And then on the inside, now keep in mind that it was Nan, the oldest sister, who at the time of the very first volume was 8 years old, and the second set of twins, Freddie and Flossie, were 4 years old at the time. I don't know, actually. It's hard to tell without a lot of the information. You'll notice the pages are really brittle, but I just really desperately wanted to save as much of the book as possible because the chapters that are here, the episodes, are the sweetest episodes I've read in a long time. I don't think I had a childhood book like this myself, so. I lined the inside of the book. It is my standard hollow spine, so there you go. Just so that as you open the book, it will lay flat. And to be able to sustain all the weight of the pages that I did include in the 5 years, there's probably over 200 sides or 200 pages to it. I did use the French linen that I get from Mia, super heavyweight versus the muslin that I normally use for my bookbinding, but it carries the weight perfectly. And keep in mind, an 8-year-old started putting this together, so it's very messy compared to what I'm normally putting. But on the inside, this is actually a vintage wallpaper that I got from Catherine at French Billet Doux, and it's thick. It is very, very thick. In fact, it felt like maybe it was just I don't know, today's modern cardstock, but it's not. She said it's actually wallpaper. And then this sweet, 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 very vintage looking lace that I got from Heather at Ruby and Pearl XO is just accenting this slight little tuck and pocket. And in the very first page, I wasn't able to save it, but maybe I'll print it for the new owner. A little girl's name right here said Rose. So I wanted to honor whoever owned this book in the early 1900s. Of course, a very antique document from Marie at French manufacturer, early 1900s. Her great-granddaughter would probably be in her 30s or 40s by now. Antique paper doll. Actually, it was a table assignment from somebody's party, and I don't know what these punches were. But it's the most precious upper middle class little girls would be wearing. This is very antique French music, also from Marie, a French manufacturer. I asked her for the grungiest French pages she could find me, so that 1, I wouldn't have to coffee dye them, but 2, that they would match the patina of this very antique, fragile book. So I just made this front sort of a little pocket to hold the little doll. are very antique French, or they're Victorian French dolls, paper cutouts of a little girl and boy. And this is who I believe Nan and her twin, Bert, to be the oldest twins. And also from Marie. So look how patina that is. So these are very fragile, but I believe they can sit in that pocket nicely. And the very first chapter that I tried to save is called Jump Roping, or Rope Jumping and What Followed. And so I feel like this little piece of a children's workbook jumping rope fits nicely in that pocket. Or even Coptic stitching when I'm binding books, because these pages were so fragile, so I had to sew them to actual rice paper or other types of papers. So this is the sweetest page here. But this is, I believe, who Rose, the owner of the book, probably looks like as a great-grandmother. Made this actually a little bit of a, not even a paper clip, but a loose ribbon clip, just so that it can hang over this page. And this is vintage Victorian, what do they call these? Not cutouts, but there's a name for them, Catherine, French billet doux. And it's actually backed by a vintage French silk snippet. So jump roping and some of the antique wallpaper from Ruby and Pearl XO. Look at these pages, how worn they are. So I felt like I had to just put antique and very, very vintage pieces in here to keep it so authentic. One of the first full chapters I was able to salvage is the first snowstorm. And so this is a little piece of a embroidery, embroidered lace or doily right here. So I thought those two together look like snowflakes. And there's the back of the coffee stain, and then the snowstorm. See how faded these are? And the history of the fact that it was probably Edward Stratemeyer himself who wrote these episodes in these very short stories within the chapters. A little bit of polka dot Swiss from Heather. Heather, I told you that I was using a lot of the ephemera you shared with me, and Catherine as well. Catherine gave me a set of these very vintage prayer cards and some vintage paper bits from Heather and bits of laces. You know, I was saying while watching her video of Angie's Happy Mail that some of you ladies just have this brilliant antique ribbon game. And I've luckily been receiving some from some of you in Happy Mail, which I'll share later. But here are the little twins. I wanted to put a little picture representing them, and I put very antique and rugged pieces of cloth from an old quilt that I got from the Junk Sister journals, instead of a lot of too much lace or ribbon. Especially at the time, I didn't have a lot except for little snippets here and there. But this is a very vintage photograph right in there with a little bit of a collage. This video definitely might be one of my longer ones. Collage here with some old fabrics, again from the same quilt from the Junk Sister journals, and a little collaging. And then this is, I believe, a German Bible page. Is that German? I know I ordered quite a bit of foreign language pages just to give these altered books I'm making a little bit of European flair. This cloth here represents to me something that you would put on a little baby. What do they call that? Not the overalls, but the frock. Is that a frock that you put over the main dress so that the children can play? But it's this really vintage white cotton with sweet embroidered lace in between. I don't know what they call that here. And just a little bit of a French laundry linen tape. But this is, I told you this book is very antique, and so I included antique or very vintage all Americana, well, except for a few French pages, but Americana ephemera. So I found an antiques dealer on Etsy who has all of these brilliant postcards and ephemera that are from the early 1900s. This one is actually an advertisement, but this is their mom. This is Mary Bobbsey, and very upper middle class, and there's their help right there. Unique name, but it says right there, "Good morning, Mama." So that is the sweetest piece of ephemera right there. Actually, M for Mary, the mom. Here is something that I feel like Nan, probably the oldest girl, put together as a collage of some of her early artwork, because back then little girls learned their embroidery and their stitching. and just some stamping from Sam Poole's stamp set, and of course a little bit of my cross stitch and fabric slow stitch there. I actually let her add one of her slow stitch pieces. This is actually made out of some of the very vintage fabrics from that same quilt that I'm going to use throughout here as little bits. But I did add little pieces, flecks of vintage wallpaper from Ruby and Pearl's set that she sent me to give you some of that depth in the petals. So it's paper and fabric, slow stitched, antique ledger page. Holden's French version of A Country Diary. So that's in the middle, a little more fabric snippet here. Of course, my favorite vintage ledger from the UK and Kay's Vintage Ephemera, backed with more of Ruby and Pearl XO's vintage and or antique wallpaper right here, and a little piece of pink lace. On the back is actually some French tags. Imagine children learning lessons while growing up. This page is a French embroidery page, also nearly antique from Marie. So it is fragile also, but not too fragile to be able to journal in or do some art journaling or keepsake. But I attached a little, again, piece of embroidery where probably Nan was practicing her embroidery sketches, but then got tired midway through and just left her project undone of a little daffodil, and she started to slow stitch or to add a little bit of a fabric piece of a butterfly, and that's just layered with some pieces of vintage scraps. And then these are actual characters also in the book. So these vintage and or antique ephemera I'm adding, Americana ephemera, are actual characters in the book. So these ducks, the children actually had a duck, and his name was Downy the Duck. And so if I had to guess, Downy the Duck is this character right there. Advertisement. Let's see. Yeah, isn't that amazing? That your photography business. One more bits. And, okay, look at these kids. Okay, so it's not early 1900s. I'm going to guess this is probably 1940s, but they are the sweetest because they look like they probably could be Freddie and Flossie growing, at age 4. Look how prim and proper they look. And they're holding roses. So there's 3 characters. Notice on this page it's just like one of the rice paper ledger, but when you flip it over, it's actually a French advertisement of Ed Pinot. He has, or this was a French eau de toilette line, and I'm not sure if it's still around. I actually have to look that up. But it's an advertisement of 3 little girls holding flowers for 3 of the scents. Advertisement with these kids representing these 3 scents. So I just thought that was cute. This is a very antique German Valentine card, but it's in English, and I got it from the same Etsy antique dealer who has all the other, or sold me all the other ephemera. But I roll this wheel of mine to catch the heart of my Valentine, and it's 2 puppies. Look how cute that is. So there, it looks like there's a little bit of a, oh, okay, I'm just now noticing that. The head bobs back and forth. Isn't that funny? Bobbsey Twins and the head is bobbing back and forth. Anyway, these are the dog characters in the book, and their dogs are named Snap and Waggo. So even though this is girl and boy, they could be Snap and Waggo characters in the book. And then a little bit of children's workbook pages that I put in there. A little bit of naughty behavior going on because whose childhood was perfect and proper, not mine. I made a little fabric house. Heather's tutorial on the paper chateau. But there was just something about it, and the blues from the dog's outfits just looked really good, and the toile in the back. So I backed this paper here, rice paper. These rice papers I got from an antique store are really strong and actually help strengthen some of these antique pages. Here's another photograph is the best way to honor the stories and still have your art journal / junk journal keepsake. And this page is the other half of the French music from Marie, and a very vintage piece of paper doll dress cutout. Again, probably Flossie's little outfit during Easter. On this side, I think this is Nan. You know, as she's aging, she's probably now closer to 10 years old in this picture is what I'm going to guess, 10, 11. Again, the sister who put together the Keepsake from the antique seller. So I'll have to research what that really was used for. But that sure is a very innocent-looking image of a little girl for this advertisement. But I loved how it backs against this blue toile. This is actually a toile wallpaper that I got from Jubilee Flea. She has these little vintage sets that she sells. Included a little bit of maybe typewriter paper that I got from Brussels. Who is it? Postal Love on Instagram. One of her packages finally arrived a couple of months ago, so I'm starting to use a lot of those papers. But very vintage Easter bits that also came from Jubilee Flea. But I'll just leave this wallpaper floating for you, but I like how that looks in there. And then just a little bit of string just to represent things that little kids save for some reason. Or at least I did as a little kid. I would save the weirdest little things. Okay, so here's the second signature. And there's a group or a company called Peg and All, and they make really very country, vintage, and simple journals. And they use a lot of the traditional bookbinding stitches, but they also use a lot of fabric to seam bind their pages without making it look too formal. So in fact, they'll have a lot of sketchbooks that are just bound by fabrics. But her first cake baking, she's actually learning from not her grandmother, but their cook, or what did they call, I guess she is a cook. They didn't call them personal chefs back then. But look at all this natural vintage, I don't know what that is, brownie mix, something, dirt from Little Rose who owned it. Anyway, I love this full chapter. I love it. But I did have to salvage it a lot using these vintage fabrics and little bits of ledger. And it's the sweetest story. And look at those edges on the pages. But it's a full story, and I love including cookbook or recipe pages, vintage recipes in my altered books. And I feel like this really honors all the tradition that she learned from their cook. And their cook's name was, I forgot to tell you, Dinah. So Dinah was an old lady who was staff for their family and was their family cook, and I feel like that's her. So that's Dinah, who taught Nan how to bake and cook basic dishes. And to honor the tradition of including vintage recipes, whether they're European or American recipes, I'm including this little pieces of this old cookbook from the early 1900s. It was actually an advertisement for this baking powder company, the Calamit. And I've used this one before, but this one is extremely brittle. And so I just made it sort of a keepsake, sort of in the tradition of the fabric seam binding that Peg and All, I'll flash them on the screen and give a link, use in their bookbinding methods and some of the journals they sell. But it includes recipes and, of course, the vintage ledgers from both France and the UK. But real recipes of apple cake, banana cream cake, things you could either chop up or use as collage in your other journals. This is an advertisement from a 1909 magazine, American magazine. And Nan, as she's aging, you'll see through the book, oh my gosh, this video might be long, but as she ages, she starts to like boys, and this is one of her secret crushes. So this was actually a page. And of course, on one side, it was originally intended to be this baker's cocoa for the cook Dinah, who's teaching Nan. But then I flipped it over and I thought, oh yeah, that's Nan's boyfriend for sure. So more recipes. Oh, and this little page here actually came from the Bobsie Twins. A little child. I don't know if someone sold it for 40 cents once upon a time. I don't even know what year that might be. 40-cent books. Back. Oh, and I made you little collage recipe cards using vintage and or antique ledger papers. So I just kind of chopped them up and then gave you some gesso and or look at that. Some of the patina from one of the pages had bled over, but little bits of fabric too. But these could be your 3x5 recipe cards that you can place in your journal as keepsake recipes, maybe from your grandma. I have some from my grandma, and I actually do make her pancakes, and I thought about putting Ida's pancake recipe in here, but I don't know. It's too good. I feel like somebody might steal it and start selling it or something. But anyway, that's included, and there's Dinah the Cook. And this is actually a cabinet card from Catherine at French Bijoux, backed by with some very vintage French lace bits, and backed by very antique, is this French? I got this from Donkey Journal Paper Love in Norway. Dinah the Cook, just to honor the people who teach us how to cook and bake in our lives. But look at that. So a little bit of crayon markings, and very authentic and original. These are not copies, original pages from the ledgers. And this is another page from that same 1909, the American magazine, with mothers and their use of cornstarch. Oh, and this might be one of the only images of the father. Their dad's name, I don't remember. I just call him Mr. Bobbsey. But isn't that funny? The dad. But then here's a little bit of the newsprint, childhood print practice paper that I like to use because it's really good with your fountain pens. I don't know. I guess it's the newsprint quality, but it's nice on this paper here. And then, of course, some vintage, very vintage, from the early 1900s children's workbook pages. Actually, a book from 1916 that I've been tearing these out from, but they're actually thicker, so those are fun. And then a little collage from some of the ephemera that my soon-to-be cousin-in-law gave me, with a little bit of fabric-like paper bits, and of course a little bit of French receipt, right, or a work order receipt right there, just because it looks like, to me, it looks like my grandma's writing or somebody's handwriting of a recipe. And a little bit of fabric, cotton lace here, or embroidery, but it's sweet. Nan probably practicing her baking. And this is one of my favorites. I always gasp when there's a piece that I love. Isn't that funny? Just lighting here. I'm trying to chase the sun, unlike yesterday in Seattle. Today has been rainy, and so I'm catching the sun whenever I can. This is Wonder Bread. What year? Does it show the year? I thought it showed the year on here. It's very brittle, so I used my healing tape, the acid-free by Line Co. acid-free mending tape that I showed you the other day for traditional book binding and book repair. But this is from, it is early 1900s, but middle of the century. And it's just perfect because it's next to this parchment paper, bread from this is actually a floating children's workbook page. This is a bale, big bundle of cotton, and then here's the baker right there. So I'll bring out the green a little bit. But on this page here, one of my last few recipe pages from one of those vintage books that I have, and this one is for apple cake and molasses cupcake. Yeah, griddle cakes. I love griddle cakes or pancakes. And then, of course, traditional devil's food cake on the back. And if you're going to have cake, you must have tea. Mother of pearl flower button from Heather. And then just back that button here. Even though this is coffee dyed paper, whenever I use buttons, if I feel like the page might be a little too fragile, I'll always back it with just a little fabric. Ledger paper. This one is American. No, I know I got this from Kay's Vintage Ephemera, so this must be a British ledger paper. Some more of that recipe. These are actually recipe pages from the Norwegian cookbook that I have, the vintage Norwegian cookbook. So I have not translated it, but I think it's bread, because I've translated enough of it to at least make it perfect for this spot here. And these are real. These are authentic recipes. So anyone out there who's nostalgic about their grandmother's recipes just might be in here. This I actually got from one of my journals from Sheena, Luna Rosu, Once Upon a Time. But I just love the super fine, Heather from Ruby and Pearl XO does it too, but when you guys do your paste, it's so fine and thin. You must get a super fine version of the modeling paste. I probably have one that's a little medium weight. But I love this envelope, and it does have that little bit of trim in here. And the reason I like it here is because the inside is this color. Look at that peach color, peach rose color. I hope it's coming through with the sunlight. But I just like how this page looks. And this is actually a real telegram from one of my sister-in-law, my current sister-in-law. I only have 1, 2, 3. I have 3? No. I have 3 brothers. I have 2 sister-in-laws. But I have a cousin-in-law who's about to be married to my cousin. So anyway, this is from her family. The one from Central Oregon. She grew up in the Eugene area. And this is, I think, her grandmother's or great-grandmother's telegram. And I don't know why. I think the era, this one was 1920, 1943. But there's something about this telegram that was saying, you know what? Maybe Nan, as an adult, had stuck it in here. And of course, it has a little vintage doily or piece of fabric here, and a little piece of ephemera paper, right? Dressed in or ruined and got mud on. There's the back of that paper and some of the coffee staining with the lace of the doily. More recipes, parchment, some of Heather's very vintage and or antique wallpapers just to line some of the pages, and more cookie. Oh, look how they spell cookie. This is that 1916 children's workbook. Cookie, Kooky. Jack ate a cookie with a Y. I've never seen it spelled that way. Is that how they used to spell cookie? Anyway, I get distracted by the littlest details. I think that's how come I love to make these vintage and antique journals. Grape Nuts advertisement from that 1909 magazine, All-American magazine. Some ads here. Oh, and I love this since we are sort of in the recipe section of the book, Keepsake. French page of probably the cook, Dinah, going to buy her poulet, her chicken, and she's buying it from the, what do they call them? Going to the butcher. And so she's trying to maximize her probably francs at that time. It was just floating. More of the handwriting from the ledger paper. And then this is now the fourth signature. And it's all about the little kids growing up. So they're probably now aged 12 and 8. So Nan is probably 12, 13, preteen. So this is Nan. She's starting to grow up to be a young lady. And you could start to see her pull away from the little kids a little bit. This is some French lace and French silks from Miab, a brown paper parcel parties. So this page is actually a full flip out. Let me see, I'll zoom out a little bit. More workbook page. And then on here, it's a little bit of ledger, and this looks like a little bit of nothing, but it is a vintage or very antique Merry Christmas card. And has that plastic frame around it. And on the inside it says Happy New Year. I don't know what, Russ and Phyllis. And then on the inside you could actually do a little bit of journaling. So look at that, isn't that sweet? But I have it this way for some reason, because on this side I just needed a little pop of color just to bring the greens together, and you could see Nan and her friends starting to get ready for the Christmas party that everyone's going to be invited to. And how do I know? Because the next chapter I was able to save is Christmas. Here are the ladies gossiping about who's invited, who's not. Yes, they did gossip back then. At least grown-ups still do today, if you ask me. And so this page was pretty beat up. I don't know what Rose was doing or eating, but I did have to use a lot of vintage cotton and some of my more decorative stitching and binding, since I figured it's the Christmas chapter. And then on this side here, this is actually a flea market find that I got on Etsy. Someone went to a Parisian flea market and there was a sample book of vintage wallpapers. So this one is very brittle, just like a lot of Heather's more antique wallpapers. It's a little chalky, but I love the colors, and it's being strengthened by this rice paper, more children's newsprint practice paper, and the back of the French advertisement, or French embroidery, with a little bit of antique wallpaper from Heather again. Especially because it is so brittle. I felt like as we're turning the pages, I like having something to kind of strengthen and brace, you know, our fingertips. Not quite oily or dirty as Rose's fingertips on some of these chapters, but we love our books. Okay, so the whole Christmas chapter is included. And then on this page here, this is actually a very vintage or nearly antique label of a French soap included. So I was going to use it as a belly band, but I went ahead and glued most of it down with just a little bit of a belly band space here for you, just because it is a little more, it's nearly antique, so it's a little more fragile. Some of the German gospel pages, I thought that would be fitting. And then here's little Flossie. She's a little sad because she's not really the preteen that Nan is, and so she feels like her big sister is starting to leave her alone, and she doesn't like boys yet, but she has to dress up in these darn bows and big hats and fluffy dresses. And so she kind of looks like me when I was pouting as a kid, like, why do I have to dress up for a party? It's your grown-up party. It completely down, but it is also a tuck here, just in case you have a little bit of your party dress that you've saved from your childhood. And there's the back of that. Anywhere you see some little fabric bits or scraps of paper, sure, I could say it's a collage, but it's really to help reinforce your pages. This bookmark actually looks like what I believe Nan is starting to look like as a teenager or preteen. Look at the smirk on her face because she gets to go to another party. And guess who's going to be at the party? Boys. Boys are going to be at the party. And so she has a little smirk like, what am I going to wear to impress? But Kay's Vintage Ephemera actually made this bookmark, and I just needed to include her. So this is a British little girl, and of course this is an American story, but who's to say? I'll put little bits of lace into an ephemera envelope for you, whoever buys this, and you could add your own little bits as well. Because I really love how Angie and Heather layered their laces, how delicate they are, but they're not too bulky at all, and they're just enough to kind of give a little bit of a character to a page. So there's that. And then on the back, even though it is a childhood party, first girl boy party, it will be chaperoned by the parents. So here's an old photograph of the parents, and there's a little the little twin, Freddie, as he's aging now too. French book that I have about family. So in the end, it's always about family. And then this is the antique embroidery French page. Has some vintage or antique wallpaper to help strengthen. And a very, very fragile antique ephemera of a sleeping lady or maiden in the middle of the forest. And it was one of those chocolate ads. But it's so dainty. Look at that. Look how patina that is. Our luggage tag label that I got on Etsy, just to give it a little strength. But there's your embroidery page. So a lot of these older French pages I left as fold out so that you could see as much of the design as possible. A little vintage picture of a boy and his bunny. Is there a bunny character in this book? I don't think there is. There are ducks, dogs, cats, at least one cat, but no bunnies that I know. But there might be an episode or a themed book after 1908 about Easter, maybe. Easter table decorations. This is a vintage book page. Look at these greens, though. Look how nicely they go with this very antique French prayer card. This is another one of the antique or vintage ephemeras from the same American seller. It's a postcard from 1910. So I just washi taped that on there. This green is actually wallpaper, vintage or nearly antique from Heather Ruby and Pearl XO. So it's a little bit more brittle. That's why I pasted it down to this British ledger paper. A little bit of stamping from Sam Poole's set. But look at Nan. She's definitely now becoming an older teenager. See, she's still a little girl. So these are the book pages that I have from I told you I was using them in the Freckles book, The First Journeys in Numberland, where these pages and these lessons are just the sweetest. So a lot of counting. So this book is circa 1912, I think, 1912, 1916. Amazing images. But they actually have crafts in there. Oh, look at that little boy. But they have crafts. So look at this picture frame, origami picture frame that you can make for Mother's birthday or Mother's Day, which is coming up really quickly. I don't know how that happened for you, so that you can take that out. Because one, I didn't want this journal or keepsake to get too thick, but two, I don't know, for some projects I like being able to pull things out from my journal. And here's the other side of that French Femina page. Is that little girl who did not want to go to the party. She's like, do I have to dress up? And the mother, Mrs. Bobbsey, saying yes. And here's Nan. She's saying, are you ready yet? But look at that outfit. Let's see if I can pick. Sure, I believe in Russian. Either that or very messy writing that I can't read. But I just love including little children's handwriting or kids' handwriting. So this is the fifth and final signature, and it has a little picture, a big picture. It's from the 1909 American magazine of who I believe Flossie to look like, at least when she was maybe 6 or 8, turning 8. But look at the little curls, how they did curlers back then using cotton rags. And there's Dinah the cook, or maybe even the mom in the kitchen helping the brother shampoo his hair. That's probably a postcard birthday greeting from I thought it had the year, but I got this from Penny and Rose Papery, but it's fully embossed. I don't know if you can see the raised embossing on there. And a little bit of the mixed media sprays of that little postcard. Look at the twins. I imagine the younger Flossie and her brother. Why do they have such weird names anyway? What is that? Yo-yos or what have you, instead of going to parties. And so they're pouting a little because after the Christmas party is this children's party that their older sister is so excited about because it'll have boys. So this is the rest of the chapter for the children's party. And little bits of antique wallpaper, because again, very fragile pages. This bookmark is actually sitting here because this is the spine as I got it from when I originally ordered it. And I'll put on here who I ordered it from. I had to check with her if it was her because I couldn't quite remember. I ordered it off Instagram. Backed by that very thick French linen and French tulle. But this is the muslin that I use, that modern line co-muslin that I showed you in the other altered book for the wildflowers. This is what they use, but of course this is over 100 years old. But they also would put layers of paper on top of the muslin before it would actually be glued down onto the back pages, back and front, just to give it added strength. So you would have your stitching, your muslin, your glue. I wanted to honor the book that way. More pages for journaling, more of your floating workbook pages. I just had to include them because how can you not? Look at those kids. Okay, this page looks a little stern. It is from the American magazine. But because this is a children's keepsake, and this chapter actually is, even though it starts off with a children's party, all about the homework that they hate to do. So they did keep some of their homework pages, and these are their favorite teachers. So this American magazine actually had an article about great women. And so I decided to make it the center of this signature. So The American Woman by Ida M. Tarbell. And Frances Wright was actually an advocate, and I guess today's modern day sort of not spokesperson, but for someone who fought for equal right to education for all races, all classes, not just the wealthy, not just the upper middle class or middle class, but all classes, all children deserve equal education in education. So there's my little soapbox. And this is actually a photo from my sister-in-law, also from her grandmother or great-grandmother. They recently found this in their attic. So somewhere in there is my sister-in-law's grandmother as a child, or great-grandmother. I'm not sure what year this is, but look at that. School, childhood friends that you make. Okay, so this is one of the last pieces of All-American ephemera, antique that I have that were advertisements. But this one is not exactly the similar advertisement. They actually have the name of the trunk company. Harness, Trunks, and Whips. And then you have these sweet little children. I mean, look at that. Isn't that funny? Let me zoom in a little bit more. The sweetest little photo. But then it's for a Harness, Trunks, and Whip company. Harrison and Weinman. Syracuse, New York. Oh, these advertisements are so funny. And that's backed by a little bit of velvet, brown velvet, that I got from Ruby and Pearlix. Oh, thank you, Heather. Here's a page, Fun on the Ice. I actually grew up ice skating. I did not become Dorothy Hamill, but I did idolize her. And they're the younger Flossie. And that's so sweet. She's on ice skates. Brittle. So I just attached it to a piece of acid-free sketch paper. And one of the pages from Freddie Loses Himself. Excuse me. Allergy season in Seattle. The pages became more brittle, as you can see in the middle there. I just used different types of stitch work. This you would actually use in a traditional bookbinding, but I exposed it because I figure I could not get it into the signature itself, and that's okay. And a little piece of the race and the runway in the back of that the American magazine. In the back is a formal document from Marie, French manufacturer. I told you that Nan put this book together as a keepsake of the Bobsie Twins' childhood. But since Rose, the owner of this book, actually is now a great-grandmother and landowner, in theory, I'm thinking this is a document to some land that the great-granddaughter has just inherited. And so even though Bobsie Twins is an American story, Rose could be a mix American with European ancestry. And so I'm including this, and this ribbon actually came from Marie as well. So it was wrapped this way with the French key that you see on the front of the book. They were all together. This, the document on front, plus the French key, and the Victorian die cuts were all part of the packet. So this is actually a very formal and large document. And notarized and signature included. But the great-granddaughter is inheriting some land from the family. And then there's the back of this French vintage or antique wallpaper from Catherine. I left it exposed where it was cracking just so you could see. It's not cardstock. It's antique French wallpaper. And I think the color just does the story justice, and the ribbon on the document as well. This is actually a floating pocket from Marie. She might have had some of her ephemera in here as a thank you to me. So it actually does have pockets here for you. So if you want to add some of your ephemera, your own ephemera, and leave it floating throughout the book, I think that would be a sweet way. Your own pocket if you have some fabrics. And then there's the back of the book. But in this case, I did not, because I really wanted to show the age. I did seal it just a little bit, but you could see the fibers. All of Americana keepsake, Americana ephemera, some antique, and the rest very, very, very vintage, nearly antique. And I hope you like that altered book. I will include this little recipe ephemera booklet. I'm starting to put together this book for her siblings. And some very intricate embroidery on the back and some beadwork for your rosary. So hopefully the Etsy listing will be on by Sunday, May 2nd. Today's May 1st, right? So by May 2nd, the Etsy listing should be there, but if you have it favorited, it should alert you. and look for the post on Instagram. The third of and the last of the altered books I'll be making for a while, because I'm working on 3 custom fashion journals, so that might take me several weeks to finish before I can continue making more altered books. But then after that, I also have some themed art journals that I'm making. Still in the hotel, but I'm gonna still keep on making. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.